Back to you.
So green is go. Excellent. So election year, Fed behavior, and energy. We'll try to cover all that in 15 minutes or less. So it's been over 30 years since the Fed has created a recession. It's also been over 30 years since an incumbent president has blamed the Fed for an election loss. You look at the Fed behavior, and we'll look at the rate curve, and the closer we get to November, the less the Fed would like to do. So if we're all banking on a big September cut probably isn't in the cards, but Western Asset Management that manages a reasonable amount of bond money, they published this at the end of March, saying that the Fed would likely have to start cutting this summer. The next meeting is July the 30th. The one after that is September the 17th. And the one after that is after the election. So we've got 2 windows left, and if we think about the 3 Fed chairmen that created a total of 4 recessions. So we had the 73, 74 recession and bear market. And you could see the magnitude of the interest rate curve. This is the Fed's FOMC rate. So they more than doubled the rates in 1973, leading to a recession. Paul Volcker, who was appointed by Jimmy Carter, I probably didn't help Jimmy Carter, wasn't going to be outdone. He raised rates a lot, twice, triggering 2 recessions. So those are those 2 circles. And then Greenspan raised rates in 1990, triggering a recession, mildest recession since World War II, but nevertheless a recession. And as we saw in the last slide, George Bush Sr. blamed him for not cutting rates quickly enough when the recession took hold. And we can all remember, if you're over the age of 35 or 40, we could all remember George Bush Sr. talking about, read my lips, no new taxes. Well, he did raise taxes, unfortunately. Higher taxes, higher borrowing costs, and a recession didn't help him, obviously, in the next election. We've had a few other recessions since then, but we haven't had another recession that was caused by the Federal Reserve yet. And it's not just the fact that these higher interest rates trigger slower economic activity. These higher interest rates trigger higher borrowing costs for governments and pressure on budgets. And so if you think about 2022, interest on the debt made the top 4 list, with Social Security in first place, Medicare in second place, interest on the debt number 3. And for most of us that have been around for a while, we've always spent a lot of money on defense. Defense, by no fault of its own, ended up in the 4th place last year in terms of our expenditures. If you look at the 2-year yields versus the 10-year yields over the last 50-ish years, it's been the perfect leading indicator for recessions. Every one of these negative, and like I said, Volcker did it twice. Every one of these negative trips with the 2-year yields being higher than the 10-year yields had preceded a recession. The start of the negative yield curve to the timing of the recession is often 18 months to 2 years. So you think about the timing of this last one. Now, if it's different this time, it'll be the first time in the last 50 plus years that it's different. Consensus believes in no landing. I'm not so sure. So looking at markets, so now we'll tie energy and markets into this a little bit. Looking at markets, if you take all the election years since World War II, the S&P has been up a little less than 4% between Memorial Day and Labor Day, in the election years with energy being the #1 performer. So let's hope that continues. Healthcare has been the worst performer in election years in that period of time, and we've been hearing presidential candidates for a really long time talking about what they're going to do to the healthcare industry if they get elected, and very little happens. The S&P in non-election years between Memorial Day and Labor Day is up less than 1%. That September-October period, which we've come accustomed to as being the most volatile months of the year, in election years, they're even more volatile. So what does it mean for energy and offshore? Well, we know that Trump likes birds, and we know he likes whales. So licensing around offshore wind might be problematic. Joe Biden's all in. He said he was all in. But then you think about the other aspects of sort of energy and offshore. What does it mean for the LNG space? It's fairly easy to pause the export restrictions. It's very hard to reverse the IRA law, but it's very easy to pause. It's very easy to permit more drilling. It's very easy to permit more onshore drilling. Methane is another question mark. But the energy policies of the two are obviously very, very different. And because this is sort of an offshore and shipping focus event, I'm going to leave the containers and the tariffs out of it for now. What we've seen in the last 2 months is a string of much worse than expected economic data in the US. And if you think about the times over the last 50 years where the Fed has created a recession, the pattern has typically been that the interest rate portion of the market takes a hit first, orders take a hit second, and employment gets impacted last. And once again, the time can be a couple of years from the start of the inversion of the yield curve before some of these factors take place. But if this election were to come down to economics in the end, if we think about spending budgets between Trump and Biden after the month of May, they're fairly equal, so maybe that's not as big a deal. But if it comes down to the economy, here's some of what I think are leading indicators that tell us that no landing might be a little bit too optimistic. So we've got the sentiment survey, which tends to be a pretty good leading indicator as it relates to consumer behavior. We've got mortgage applications in the US to purchase a home. So we've seen, I think, enough data points in the last 2-3 years to realize that 30-year mortgage rates at 6% or under are constructive to the market, and that mortgage rates above that are destructive to the market. Taking this back 30 years, we have the lowest mortgage application figures since 1993. And we have twice as many homes as we had back then. So once again, the interest rate sensitive parts of the market get hit first. Small businesses rely upon regional banks. Regional banks have on balance about half of their balance sheet exposed to the exposed to the housing market, whether that's residential or, unfortunately, commercial. They have the largest combined exposure to commercial real estate of any group. The small business optimism correlates very highly with small businesses' ability to borrow from regional banks. And this survey goes back 50 years as well. This dive in small business optimism is the third worst dive in that 50-year history. ISM manufacturing has been in contraction territory for about a year and 8 months now. ISM orders have been in a contraction territory less than that. ISM prices paid, so the inflation of what they're buying is historically very high. And ISM employment is showing some weakness in the last 2 or 3 months as well. ISM services have been very stubborn. I don't know about you, but when I want to get rid of a service, when I have something on my television, I want to get rid of it. I found the amount of time it takes to figure out how to cancel that service is extraordinary. So I can understand how services are so sticky on the way down. And then finally with job openings. Now, granted, 12 million job openings after the pandemic was incredible. But 8 million job openings at this point in time is pretty normal. And I like to show charts like this to my grandsons. And I say, what's going on here? And he says, Grandpa, that's going down. So just in case anyone was confused, that's going down. Okay? If it bounces once in a while, it's fine. It's you fell off the roof of a hotel and you landed on an awning, but you're going down. So the 1, 2, 3, and as it relates to interest rate sensitive, we've seen it also as it relates to M&A activity. We have been through, up until the second quarter, 6 of the worst quarters in M&A in just over 10 years. And then finally, the inflation. This felt really good when they first invented it, and it felt really good for over like 35 years. We can measure rents, that's too easy. Let's give homeowners a survey and ask them what they think. And so in a market where you can have some leading indicators and some current indicators, we measure rent in a crazy fashion. The trouble is, up until, and if you take it back, it never got too hot, it never got too cold, it never got to 8% before. It never stayed negative for more than a month or a quarter. This has been the perfect way. It's 23.5% of headline CPI, it's 30% of core CPI. I would argue, other than for those of you who like coffee, cocoa, chocolate, and cars, inflation's not a problem anymore. It's just the way we measure it. We know that rents aren't climbing at 5 or 6% year on year across this country anymore. We certainly know that from a regional point of view, for instance, the West Coast. But the way we measure rents have made it difficult for the Fed to argue with core staying so high that it's time to cut rates. But we'll see what happens on July 30th and July 31st. So we've talked about a really big economy here. And now it's time we talk about another really big economy. So Shahzad Kazi of China Beige Book. And I'm a fan of their work. I've been following their predictions for the last since 2019. Nobody has gotten it more right. He told me, Jim, we're expensive, but we're worth it. And so Shahzad, if you'll join me up on stage. Good to see you.